Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to neutrally unpack a truly fascinating piece of text titled Birds and Bees. Now, you might be wondering, why does this actually matter to us? Well, looking at how this author interprets specific real-world biological case studies gives us this incredible window into how philosophical and theological arguments are built. We're going to look closely at how the source material uses some really unique animal traits to push back against the concept of slow evolutionary development. It's a fascinating read, so let's get started.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Accidental development versus special creation. 2. The Ousel's buoyancy apparatus. 3. The surgeon's forceps beak. 4. The bee's survival crisis. And finally, number 5, divine provision and care.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Accidental Development versus Special Creation, or as we like to call it, the battle lines of biology.
Right out of the gate, this source text sets up a very stark contrast between two completely different worldviews. On one side, the author presents the evolutionist view. They describe this as a reliance on nature, or basically blind chance, where things grow through slow, accidental development just in response to a need. But on the flip side is the author's viewpoint, immediate provision by God. In this framework, biological traits, they aren't the result of slow accidental growth at all. They are intentional provision. The idea here is that the creator saw survival need and provided the exact mechanism required right from the very start.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Ousel's buoyancy apparatus, sinking like lead, floating like smoke. So meet our first biological case study. The author leans into some absolutely vivid imagery here to introduce us to the Ousel. It's this friendly little Pacific coast water bird that hangs out near swift, splashy mountain streams. But what makes this bird so remarkable to the author is this bizarre physical trait it has. It is apparently equipped with a mysterious muscular apparatus that allows it to radically control its buoyancy in the water. Let's actually look at how the source describes this creature in action, because it's pretty wild. The text outlines a 5-step process that brilliantly illustrates a feeding mechanism that seemingly defies normal physics. First up, using its special muscular equipment, the bird instantly exhausts every single bit of air from its body. Second, it drops rapidly, sinking to the bottom of the stream, quote, like a piece of lead. Third, it just casually walks around foraging for bits of food right on the stream bed like it's no big deal at all. Fourth, once it's eaten its fill, it wanders up to the bank, shakes itself off, and takes in air again. And finally, it mysteriously sets itself afloat once more. The author beautifully puts it, like a wisp of smoke. And the author follows up that striking description with a very direct rhetorical question. Now that's special creation, isn't it? You see, the text completely dismisses the evolutionary idea that nature simply grew this incredibly complex instant exhaust muscular apparatus by accident. Instead, the author is arguing that God made this particular bird exactly as he did because he foresaw that this specific buoyancy control was absolutely required for its immediate survival in those swift mountain streams. All right, Section 3, the surgeon's forceps beak, a tight predicament. For our second Pacific Coast bird, the source sets up a really unique survival problem. I mean, just think about this physical dilemma for a second. The author describes a bird whose diet consists entirely of large worms living at the very bottom of holes in the sand. Now, the bird's beak is exactly the right length to reach the worm, which is great. However, there's a huge catch. The hole is incredibly narrow. When the bird sticks its beak in, those narrow sand walls squeeze the beak completely shut. It's quite a predicament, right? The bird can reach the luscious worm, but it literally cannot open its jaws to pick it up. So how in the world does it survive? Well, the crucial point for the author is the highly specialized solution to this exact problem. The text claims that God arranged a custom-made tool for this bird, a tiny flap at the very bottom of the beak, which functions much like a surgeon's forceps. With this neat little arrangement, the bird doesn't even need to open its whole beak. It simply uses this special flap to pinch the worm, back straight out of the hole, and gobble it down. For the author, this isn't some random trial and error over millions of years. It's a convenient, highly intelligent provision for getting food exactly when the bird needed it. Now we're on to Section 4, the bee's survival crisis, the core anti-evolution argument. This is where the source text brings in its most direct piece of evidence against the idea of slow evolutionary development. The text actually references an article written by a biologist who shared the author's skepticism, and it features this incredibly catchy title, "Evolution Goes to Pieces on a Bee's Knee." I love that phrasing.
The author uses this reference to directly, head-on, challenge the evolutionary teaching that an organ is produced slowly over huge periods of time in response to a creature's developing need. To make this point land, the text sets up a severe life-or-death biological threat. When bees crawl into blossoms to gather pollen, that exact same pollen stops up their breathing apparatus. It is so severe that, according to the source we're looking at, the bees actually cannot breathe while they are inside the flower. This establishes an absolute immediate necessity for a survival mechanism. Basically, if they can't breathe, they die on the spot.
So the author builds this into a step-by-step logical deduction. First, as we just saw, pollen stops up the bee's breathing apparatus in the blossoms. Second, bees are equipped with these very special, stiff brushes on their knees, specifically designed to clean this pollen out so they don't suffocate. Third, and here is the absolute crux of the anti-evolution argument, if traits evolved slowly through the ages, the very first bee to exist would have lacked these brushes. Fourth, without those brushes, that first bee would have suffocated instantly upon entering its very first flower. Therefore, step 5, the whole bee family would have gone extinct right then and there. The author concludes that these brushes had to be provided all at once to save that very first bee. Which brings us to our final part, section 5, divine provision and care, the spiritual conclusion. In the closing portion of the text, the author actually shifts gears. We move away from the physical case studies of the Ousel and the bee's knee and pivot toward a much broader theological takeaway. And it's captured perfectly in this quote: "If he cares for the tiny animal world, he cares for us too." The author argues that God anticipating the physical needs of his creatures points directly to a deeply caring creator. The logic presented here is that if a creator loves a little bird on the West Coast enough to make its existence comfortable with special buoyancy and forceps beaks, well, he loves humans even more. The text concludes with the assertion that this exact same creator desires to ultimately remove the curse of sin and bring all of nature back into perfect balance. Which leaves us with this final overarching question to chew on. How do we interpret the origins of complex biological mechanisms? The text we've unpacked today uses the absolute marvels of nature, buoyancy control, specialized forceps beaks, and those tiny pollen brushes to vigorously challenge evolutionary theory and argue for immediate divine provision. Regardless of where you personally stand on the origins debate, you have to admit, Birds and Bees offers a really fascinating look at how biological observation can be utilized to craft a compelling philosophical narrative. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions about the amazing world around us.